Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm your host, Richard Dugan, and I thank you so much for joining us on the radio broadcast at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on a Sunday and Monday mornings at 1 a.m. The broadcast podcasts are available on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, as well as richarddugan.com, the homepage, as well as the radio shows page. And we encourage you, if you can, to support us financially to keep the programs moving forward and take care of all of the ancillary things through PayPal and Patreon accounts. They are for your security as well as ours. We hope that you will do your part and do what you can if you feel led to do so. We'll even take energetic support as well. And we also encourage you to go to our guest's website. We'll be giving you that during the interview so that you can continue your evolutionary process. We also encourage you to spend time in meditation, in prayer, in just quiet time during 2020, the year of perfect vision, and the 2020s, the decade of perfect vision. And we hope that you will do that. Listen to that still small voice, that divine self, your higher self, and follow the promptings. And find that still, small, quiet, peaceful place where you can just relax and get a hold of what's really important in your life. We encourage you to do that. And we also encourage you to stay tuned to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan. Stay tuned. I will tell you that today's program I have been looking forward to since I'm thinking it's the early or mid 1990s, almost 30 years, ladies and gentlemen, to talk with this gentleman who has made a great impact, not just on my life, but on the lives of millions of people around the world, and is making a big impact now. He is participating through the publishing company of Sacred Stories Publishing, who we brought on for 12 interviews back in January of 2020 with Chaos to Clarity. And he has written the foreword to the sequel, if you will, or the volume 2. And the title of the book is called Crappy to Happy. The foreword is written by my guest, James Redfeild. James, thank you so much. It's great to have you with us. I will do my utmost to just treat you just like one of my regular guests, in spite of the fact that if I could interview Paramahansa Yogananda, who is the author of my primer, my metaphysical primer, that would be wonderful, but I'd need a channel for that these days. But thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And look, thanks for your voice out there. You've been in this a long time. I can't believe we haven't talked. But,
well, we've tweeted. We've tweeted.
On your reach. Yeah, we have.
Yeah. You have been around for a long time. And I'm first of all, I'll tell you, I'm 60. This year I'm 60. 2020 is my 60th year. And I'm excited about it. I repeat this line over and over again. It's in a song by John Denver, and it says, "Changes somehow frighten me. Still, I have to smile because it turns me on to think of growing old." Now that's going back almost 45 or close to 50 years for me. I've been listening to his music since they actually refer to him as the Elvis or Beatles of the 70s. He was the perennial. But you came out with the Celestine prophecy, which we're going to talk a little bit about, back in the late 90s, late 80s or early 90s.
More like mid 90s.
Mid 90s. Okay.
Yeah.
So 25 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
we did it a little differently. We created our own company at first, and then we finally turned it over to a larger company. But yeah, by the mid 90s, it had all happened. And that's the story, of course.
And I love the gentleman that has been selected to do the Audible. I've only started listening to it. Lou Diamond Phillips.
Yes.
I love him in his various programs. I mean, you could have gotten Tommy Lee Jones, of Men in Black fame, or any of these folks to do the reading of your book. And that's another exciting thing. Now, I myself have been into audibles before audibles were cool. Okay. Because as a kid growing up, I was legally blind, and I used to listen to talking books and recordings for the blind, which is where I listened to Autobiography of a Yogi, along with a bunch of other wonderful works and my textbooks as well. So it's not nothing new for me, and now I produce them, which is kind of exciting. I even recorded Celestine Prophecy for my first wife, who was totally blind. And she, as far as I know, she still has the cassettes. At least I think she still has the tapes. Whether she listens to them or not, I don't know. But all I know is, as I'm reading, and to me, it's the same as if I was reading Dan Brown's work. When my second wife and I were traveling and we'd put the audio tape in, I was playing the movie in my mind. And that to me speaks to the wonderful creativity that an author has. Did you think when you first started as an author that you were going to be able to paint those kinds of pictures for people?
Well, I was very obsessive about it. So, I all my friends tell me I held on to it for 2 years after it was written, because I was just obsessed with the energy of it. Mm-hmm. And the transformative kind of excitement about it, because that's what I eventually, when I would read it, that's sort of the imprint, energetic imprint that went into the novel, because it, novels write themselves. And,
yeah.
And so, I've always said, well, when people say, how'd you get all that in there? And how'd you make those insights really insights? I just kind of say, well, I'm not sure, because what happens with a novel is the characters start to take on a life of their own. And if you follow that, then you've got something that feels like it's a dynamic story. You can't make it up. No novelist makes it up to have this energy of a real, other world that you're transmitting to the reader. It just doesn't happen, because it's a given. It's given to us, like most other creations.
Now, I have to ask you this question. My wife told me that I was to ask you this question. It's similar to the question that a dear friend of mine who has since passed away, but he is fundamental. He is a foundational individual in my life's development back in the 80s. Og Mandino, who wrote Greatest Miracle in the World, which I recorded for Sun Sounds Radio Reading Service for the blind and visually impaired back in 1982. I actually have the reel-to-reels of that, and I go back and listen and going, who the heck is that? Anyway, I remember getting the chance to interview him back then, and he would get this question all the time about his book, The Greatest Miracle in the World, Simon Potter and the whole story. And so the question that I ask you, that is more from my wife, and I have a feeling where I know where the answer is going here, is the story or any part of it true? Did any of this really happen?
Well,
and your answer is
all the important parts are true.
Okay, I like that answer.
It's a novel, and in a sense, it has its own life as a novel. It's certainly based on my experiences and the experiences of others that I could vouch for. So all the experiential happenings in the book are certainly absolutely true. And the spiritual understanding that the book is the kind of map for is, in my opinion, absolutely true. It does art, Gurdjieff said all art is objective, meaning it has an energy of its own. So all the stories of mystical happenings with books happen, with the Celestine Prophecy. It fell off the shelf and in libraries at people's feet. It glowed from across the room. And I don't take any credit for that. That's the
Yeah.
energy, the objective energy that got into the book because of where I was when I hold myself up in a one bedroom apartment for 3 years doing this, and wouldn't let it go until I felt, well, actually, I didn't let it go until when I let other people read it. They said, they didn't say, well, here's where I stopped. I kept tinkering with it until what they said was, listen, can I have another copy of this? Because I've got a friend in Spain that I want to send it to because we love to talk about things like this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's when I knew it was ready to go out in the world.
And I think that that's one of the greatest compliments any author can have, is that they've generated a conversation. I love those kinds of conversations. Sitting around, whether it's a campfire or we have this fire pit in our backyard, or sitting around a dining room table with a glass of wine or your favorite beverage, what have you. Sometimes when my wife and I would go, we've only been a few times camping with our new travel trailer and so forth, and we would put the chairs out there and we just sit there. The music was low, and we just sit there talking about these kinds of things, I mean, and we'd even get into the esoteric area of aliens and life on other planets and other dimensions. And I have to say that my perspective would be on your story, Celestine Prophecy in particular, it is true. Maybe not in this dimension, maybe in another dimension. It absolutely happened and is happening. And that there are old growth forests, and unfortunately we're losing them left and right here in this dimension, unfortunately, but there are still some, and you can find them if you really want to find them, and find those insights, whether you read the Celestine Prophecy and the 9th and 10th Insight and the other sequels, if you will, or continuations, other volumes added to it. One of the things I'm curious about is your growth as a spiritual being. Now, some would say, oh my God, James, he's at the pinnacle. He's at the top of the mountain. And I'm not putting you on the pedestal here. What I'm saying is you've made it, you understand, and now you're sharing that with the rest of us. But here you are today, and you and I had a great, wonderful conversation a few days prior to this interview, where you now have some very interesting ideas. And before we jump into those new ideas that you are delving into, tell me how you connected with Sacred Stories Publishing and became the writer of the foreword to the second volume called Crappy to Happy, which when I first read that, I thought, that sounds kind of crass. But then I started putting it in the context of 2020 and what we've all been going through, regardless of what you want to put in the list. And I'm thinking, no, that fits. That fits. So how did you connect with Sacred Stories and Kathleen, as well as Patricia?
Well, they reached out to me, and I'm not, I have an email people can use on my site, Celestine Vision. So I'm not a total recluse. And so they reached out to me, and the energy of what they had to say provoked me to go a little further, because my usual pat answer is, I've got 14 books that sit by my bed that I promised to read to offer help to people. And I try to do some of that at a level of maybe 10%, because I think that's a giving thing to do. And as you know, I think one's karma revolves around how much we give. Mm-hmm. But, it just had an energy, and when I got the book and started reading it, I realized that it captures where we are right now in the world. Everybody's been shut down or is shut down. We feel like we're at a masquerade party because our faces are covered all the time, and all we see is we don't see the full dynamic of social interaction anymore, which is frankly criminal in my view. I don't think I can go into that. so we're all of a sudden we're, at a place where we can't communicate. So the silver lining is I always advocate to keep synchronistic flow going. You gotta hit those brick walls and find the silver lining. Well, our silver lining now is to reset. Mm-hmm. Because we're resetting whether we want to or not.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
when you get separated from your social interactions, and the new social interactions that we discover all the time, that's how we discover ourself unfolding. See, so when all that happens, we're thrown back on our own inner security, right? Sometimes with no job. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes with realizing that our business has been canceled. So it was a reset. Where do you find that after being slammed? How do you come back? Yeah. And that's what I write about in the foreword. This is a timely book. It's maybe even enlightened from my point of view. And what it does is tell all these stories about the comeback.
Yeah.
Right. Being knocked down, you're losing everything. 40 million people lost everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Their jobs, their businesses, put everything into a business and then it gets shut down by a flick of somebody's signature. Again, it didn't have to happen, but it did. So now we have to make what we can out of it. And I believe it's a spiritual reset. And that's essentially the theme of the book. We can all come back at a higher level and one that's more centered spiritually, mm-hmm. And that strengthening influence. And so I'm out there running around, as you know, talking about you want to get lucky, get your karma right, because the human potential movement has reached a consensus about karma, and anybody can prove it to themselves. It's be a helper first.
Absolutely. I have to tell you that when I started hearing about the virus, and it was in late December, nothing huge, but still, I'm curious. And then, of course, hearing the stories in the United States in January, the first case has arrived and so forth. And they started doing some things, same old things they do with the flu, with the influenza when it circles the globe, and we get it, sometimes in the late winter, into spring and so forth, and then it goes away, and then another case, and more and more and more, and it starts to grow, and they decided to shut things down. And I have to tell you that I was excited. Not because they were shutting things down, not because people were getting the virus, but because they were finally hearing Einstein in reference to his definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Finally, they were doing something different. Now, whether we like it or not is a whole nother issue. That's beside the point. But the fact that they decided to do something different said to me, wow, what great opportunities are ahead of us and that we don't even know about yet. And people made it through 2008, 2009, and that financial catastrophe that did actually somewhat span a bit of the globe, the developed nations, the US and Europe and so forth. This it enveloped the entire globe. And as we started to move forward into March and April and May and June and July, you started seeing news stories about what people were doing, not just for themselves, but for other people. And I thought, wow, people are picking up on the fact that I'm not just going to sit around and wait for this to end. I need to be doing something to help other people. And then shortly before our interview here on this program, I heard an interesting news story, James. There is one country that has virtually gone back to normal because they did what we have been saying, what I have been promoting, Wash up, mask up, step back. That's been my slogan. Wash up, mask up, step back. They did that. And now they're getting back to normal. And the irony is it's China that has been accused of being the starter of all of this. And again, you know, with our skepticism over our news media in this country, it's hard to know. Did you ever think about that aspect back then, about the possibilities? I mean, wonderful. It's a reset for us spiritually, and we're going to come out the other side, just like, you know, crappy to happy, you know, we're all shut down. We're all sequestered. I was one of the few who was allowed to continue coming to work, continue doing the things that I do. So I've been very fortunate in that, but I still saw those opportunities, even for me. I mean, doing what we're doing now, I never thought I would start putting these on YouTube. So what are your thoughts? What do you recall your thoughts back then in that regard?
Well, you know, without going into any detail, because I want to stay on the positive side of things.
Sure.
You know, I believe that, you know, this was all virtually an operation. And if you really research the origins of the virus, that's not even debatable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but again, it's like, you know, there are forces out there that would rather we not be creative and productive and reaching unity across all divisions in the world. In fact, that's the last thing they want to happen because it erodes power. And, you know, that's all I always say about it,
Okay.
but I challenge everybody to, you know, stop being, you know, a fan of political parties and start looking at following the money and the power, and look into everybody's background that is on all these optimistic shows about if we all just take the vaccine, we're going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my warning is that until we're allowed, independent entities are allowed to research what's in these vaccines and all drugs for really.
Yeah.
That becomes legal, that we can actually know what's in all these drugs.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's, as far as I'm concerned, I'll never get near them. And
I know, I'm hearing that.
So, you know,
I'm hearing that a lot.
We're supposed to not sound conspiratorial these days because
Yeah.
that's a put down. We're supposed to believe what all these entities, these financial entities that are supposed to be our health leaders. Until we go and understand all that,
Yeah.
you know, what we have to do is say we want total transparency on everything that happened, and someday we'll know the truth about it all.
Yeah.
But the big but is, you know, there's a dark side, sure. There's
Mm-hmm.
money, power, and all that goes with that. But if we go into a kind of hate, you know, hatefulness toward these people and entities, what happens is we join the dark side.
Yeah.
And, once you know that it's about love and staying with an open heart, and that's the secret of life in this dimension. And not only that, but we actually know right now the operating system from the spiritual side of life on earth, that can be proved. Anybody can prove to themselves.
Yeah.
You know that you have to stay on that light side where you're looking for everyone else's best interest.
Exactly.
We still fall into controlling and power tripping each other. Until we break through these control dramas, we won't have enough karma to live the kind of creative life that this whole universe really is set up for. And again, that's my message these days.
Mm-hmm.
because I think what I wrote in terms of insights, they're not insights that are fun to talk about. They are the actual understandings of how life works, how this dimension is designed to work. And really, as a human race, we haven't really tried to get our karma in alignment with that yet. But again, it's new. Only now have I realized that what we're talking about is understanding, again, how life really works and getting into alignment with that, and watching just how much help we get karmically in the world. I've proved it to myself. I know a lot of people who've done it, but again, it has to be, a movement in our individual lifestyles and our assumptions and the way we think and act ordinarily in daily life. So, but it's an important thing to talk about, I believe, at this moment.
I think that that's one of the phrases I keep hearing many times about whatever the topic might be, is at least we've started the conversation. Well, and it sounds a little cliche now, but it's actually true that when we start talking about these things, we start discussing them, not screaming at each other across the line, but actually trying to understand what is going on, what is happening. And maybe not necessarily why, because sometimes the why gets muddled in the what is happening. I mean, there are still people who believe that the earth is flat. I can't figure out how that's possible, but they do. They do. There are people who believe we never went to the moon. It was all on a soundstage. There are people who believe that because I wasn't in New York City on September 11th of 2001, I would have to say, objectively, I don't know that it really happened, because I've seen what the film industry, with the entertainment industry, can do with CGI and special effects. Okay. I wasn't there. I'm not missing anybody. And again, I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying that this is where the cynicism starts to come in, that we need to get over. We need to let that go in order to live the kind of life that is, as you've very well said, beneficial, not just for self, but for everybody. And that's what we're here to talk about, is the choices and the knowledge of those choices to help make people's dreams come true. But if they don't know those choices exist, how can they choose them? And so we bring these different ideas to the forefront. You are working on an interesting concept that you shared with me. And is this something that we can talk about on this program today?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anything.
And what we're talking about.
We've already gone into conspiracy theories. So we know so.
Okay, very good. Open, in the next half of the program, we'll talk about aliens. How about that?
About where I draw the line, actually.
Okay, all right, very good. You start with primarily with the baby boomer generation. And from the baby boomers, we started naming the various generations. And it took me a while to figure out which one I belonged to. It turns out I am I'm a member, I guess, of the baby boomer generation. And each subsequent generation has had a designation, and they have been categorized. They have been, what do they do? There's a profiler, like in crime stories, a profiler who tries to tell you, well, this person has the characteristics of a serial killer or of this. Well, you have generations that have these characteristics, and each generation is a little different up to the present generation. First of all, would we divide them into what, 10 or 15 year cycles? Or I've always thought generations were about 25.
Well, it's where the changes happen. A lot of it's astrological.
Okay.
So I, if I look at the cycle of Pluto, for instance, you can get very close to where these changes happen in a generation. But the one that makes sense to me is that, baby boomers are the oldest generation alive. their children are millennials, and they and their older children are have been designated the Z generation.
Yeah.
Because only a generation can name itself. You know, that's the caution in all this. You know, because until a generation in mass starts to move past 38 to 41, and the bell curve is real tight on all these generations, really, because there's so many, they're so big. I mean, millennials and their children are already the most populous generation on the planet. Baby boomers are starting to think about their legacies because they can see the end, you know,
yeah,
coming up. But it's what the generations do. I think that you started to talk about that's most important, because the baby boomers were an individualist, you know, do your own thing, all that. And they looked for creative new theories about life, right? That's all we did, starting at about 15, probably. With all the rock, you know, all the music, everything reflected this, you know, we're changing, you know, we're taking humanity in a different direction, and peace and love and all that. But so it was an individualistic, and it's my theory, and other people believe it too, that if the generations alternate between individualistic, thinking new things and new places that society should go, and unifying. So the millennials are unifiers. So they're not interested in abstract theories. They're interested in looking through all the abstract theories that happened in the previous generation and pulling them together as values, unifying values in the world. And the thing about millennials is they're just reaching their clarity of mind, their greatest insight. And that happens again between 38 and 41. And then they'll really, everybody will be able to see what millennials are really about in the next 5 years, in my view, because that they're en masse starting to move into that age range. And again, I think this reset is going to be, millennials are going to survive this reset in ways that boomers won't necessarily do or follow, but it will be a unifying kind of creativity, bringing the new values. And I think it's a spiritual reset. And I think these new values are going to be a better understanding of what spirituality really feels like, and higher consciousness. How do you sustain it? All those questions that boomers have posited all these years, but that it'll be millennials that bring it together. And right now, millennials are just, you know, boomers worry about millennials, right? You know, and you know, are they ever going to engage? Well, look how chaotic the world was intellectually already before all this.
Yeah.
That and who knew what to believe? And so, can you blame millennials for not immediately engaging? No. They're doing what sane people do. So, but they'll emerge out of this, you know, and the depression will start to end if they aren't given too many vaccines.
Right.
So right now the vaccines are out of control, and you know, they're up to 71 before I think the age of 15. 71 vaccines, each of one causes brain damage. So you've got not something they can't overcome, but a real setback because of the medical establishment that we have. But since that's in question now by them, you know, we're going to be able to figure out what's in these vaccines really, and why the cover up in terms of the loss of IQ that's happening. You know, it's a lot of stuff that sounds conspiratorial, but once you look into it, it's absolutely true, all of it.
What about Generation Z?
Well, Z is they're individualists, right? Because it's an alternation. Individualists unifying around the chosen theories. Then another generation says, yeah, but let's push forward again. Let's push forward again with all these individual paths of how humans should be living. So, you know, they're still young, very young. I mean, they're just they're either facing college or just in college or just out of college.
Right.
Which means they haven't really gotten past life is about having as much fun as you can and working as little as you can. They'll get inspired, you know, as they again hit 30, which is a major astrological point, and then move on to 38. So they're just going to be positing a lot of different ways, you know, of living. Right now, it's kind of everything should be free, which is. The mechanics of that is, everybody agrees about that. You know, there's a technology out there for life to be a lot easier for the majority of humans if we could just get our hands on the technology and use it. So the intuition is, we should have a Star Trek world, but right now that technology is withheld. So. But humans have not, until we grow to a point where we're less selfish, we can't have that system of everybody. Everything is free.
Well, you know, it's interesting. A gentleman I interviewed a couple of times before his passing, Jacques Fresco. He was a visionary, an architect who has a project out in Florida. It's called the Venus Project. And he talked about the three pillars, if you will, of his vision of civilization in the future. One of them had to do with that it would not be a monetary-based system. It would be resource-based, but that everybody would, in essence, own all of the resources. You'd still have distribution, but you still have to have distribution, but the distributors wouldn't be in control of it. That the resources would belong to everybody. And so forth. And he went through the whole thing of how great this new civilization. You'd live a hell of a lot closer to where you might work, depending upon what it is you do. You could, if you wanted a car, you could have a car. You wouldn't necessarily need one because there would be other forms of less or zero polluting transportation to get you from point A to point B. I remember hearing him talk about these tubes, shuttle tubes, if you will. If you wanted to go to Paris for lunch from the west coast of the United States, you could get there in about an hour and have lunch and get back for your afternoon meeting. Obviously, even less time from New York, that kind of stuff. So I'm sitting here going, wow, this sounds fantastic. Jacques, he was 94 when I first interviewed him and asked him this question. I said, do you think this is going to happen in your life? And do you think it might happen in mine? And he says, well, first of all, I don't think it'll happen in mine, he says. And it probably won't happen in yours because the problem is, and it's kind of what you just said, the consciousness of the people has to be risen, if you will, or raised up, if you will, from where it is today. And then he quoted, I believe it was Einstein once again, who said, you cannot solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. It has to be a higher consciousness. So he said that was it. And it could be 30 years, it could be 300. It all depends upon mankind and what man wants to do, man and woman for that matter.
Right.
So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it's counterintuitive. I used to debate with a lot of my friends who came out of college thinking, what we need is a benevolent dictator. And some just government commission up there who will do the right things for the most people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, you know, I mean, this is an old wisdom that preceded, you know, the U.S., but the idea is that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if you have a dream, which a lot of baby boomers do, that if we just had the central government that made all the decisions, we could create the utopia. Well, that's, in my view, exactly the opposite way it has to happen. It has to happen by decentralization completely of more enlightened local governments. Now, you know, we're a long way from that because local governments probably are the most tyrannical of any, right? And so again, it's enlightenment, which means our motivations have to change. As long as we're insecure and we think money and power will solve that, then we can never have this utopia that we dream about. We're all programmed for it. In my view, our souls come in trying to contribute to that world, to move toward that kind of unified earth. But, you know, everybody who promises to create that, if everybody else will just let us take away your freedoms of one kind or another, mm-hmm. You know, as long as that's the way the humans think and they don't get their security from a spiritual point of view, but the needs is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, if you're hungry, you know, it's hard to get spiritual, and it's harder to get, you know, so it's all about waking up spiritually and getting motivated toward the true design of the world, which is to let us come in to life thinking we can make a contribution, and everybody supporting that idea, and we kind of do already in some countries, but the problem is that the mechanics of how to do it is only now, in my view, being learned mm-hmm. and put into actual practice. So, you know, it's hard to just employ somebody out there that's going to switch around all the economic issues and environmental issues and somehow do it fairly without taking power.
Yeah.
You know,
I know too that there are those, and I sort of lean this way a little bit, who, as we talk about in this program, we want to make this world a better place for everyone, not just for select few, not just for a certain group. We have nearly 8 billion human beings on this planet. And when we start talking, for example, about the coronavirus and the deaths, we hear numbers. Those numbers represent human beings who had lives, who had families, who contributed to their communities. And this has always perplexed me. I mean, from the earliest ages that I started hearing about people dying, you know, on the news. And I always thought, I wonder if they're going to be remembered. And I'm wondering if there's going to be, if their life will have been significant enough for people to acknowledge their contributions, no matter how great or small. And unfortunately, I mean, at least in the United States, as of our conversation now, 14,000 human beings are not here anymore. Whether or not that's an accurate number or not, you know, then they start talking about the number of people who died in this war and that war and the other war and this conflict and this disaster. And the list goes on. And again, I go back to that mindset of these aren't numbers. These are human beings. I mean, my parents, I can't go visit them. I would love to fly out there, drive out there and say hello and see them. My dad's 89. My mother's 86. My dad doesn't have great lungs in the first place. He just got over pneumonia back in, January of this year. Before the shutdown, and I'm not willing to risk their health. We have longevity in the family. I have a great grandmother I have to outlive, and she lived to be 100. So I've got another 40 years to go, virtually a lifetime. Okay. I'm not talking about a utopia here, but do you think that it's even possible? Is it something that we should even consider in terms of trying to make this a better world for all people? Is that even remotely possible? Looking at it, not so much from a practical and material standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint, in terms of that consciousness raising that we've been talking about throughout the program.
Well, for most of us, and I'll just bring up one thing, again, giving is the secret to getting. Mm-hmm. And, if we're givers first, we draw into our lives more givers that come to us, not to give us anything other than insight, a synchronicity. And if you really look at how the world really works, life, progress, creativity, everything is a result of mysterious synchronicities happening where we first learn what we really want to do in life, clarify that, and then we start to manifest that contribution in the world. It's not logical. It's only partly logical. It's mainly these so-called miracle accidents that bring us input that's just what we needed at the time. Now, if you don't believe in synchronicity and the materialistic science, that so-called science that we have right now, says that that's just individual meaning that people ascribe, and it can't be thought of as a real phenomenon in the world. But the fact is, when Carl Jung initiated the first truthful searching for human potential, then what happened was he separated from Freud. Freud was a materialist, and Carl Jung, psychotherapy, or his theory of how people grow and contribute, was introduced a spiritual aspect, which he called the self archetype, and described it very, very well. And so once that was done, then it's in my world, in my view, he thinks everything that happened by accident. There's no helping, this mysterious helping hand in the world that brings us these opportunities we think are just chance events and we were lucky. But were we lucky, or is the world designed for these mysterious coincidences to happen so that we have little breakthrough points? Anybody who's ever reached what they thought, what they finally realized was their really dream job in the world, look back, and their contribution can look back at these so-called chance events being lined up that in fact educated us to be in a place where we could then find this thrill of living our dream. And meaning our contribution to the forward progress of the world, right? It's not about money or power or any of that. It's about looking back at all the biographies of notable people that we would list as having made great contributions throughout the history of the world. If you look in all their biographies, they're full of synchronicities. So Jung said this phenomenon is one that is real, and the only thing keeping humanity from moving into the spiritual consciousness where they include and look for and manifest more of these coincidences. In other words, you get lucky, so-called. The only thing that's keeping us from moving into that is this materialistic, mindset that has been around for 400 years at least. And again, it's about science, and science stopped science was supposed to investigate all phenomena, materialistic or not, and they stopped at materialism because that's where the power and money was sustained. And now we have just a science that preaches materialism and a dead universe. And there are other thinkers, though, that bring us into this spiritual reality. Yeah. It's not like a choice, you believe in God or not. That is really has little to do with it. It's whether you embrace this metaphysical universe that we're living in and try to learn what makes you most productive. And that, again, from the human potential movement, all the thought and study and arguments and for 100 years, in my view, has reached consensus about how this metaphysical world really operates. You know?
Yeah.
So it's whether, you know, how skeptical can you be, and how long do you want to be skeptical before you actually try to prove it to yourself?
Exactly. I have had guests on this program who have had very interesting experiences of a metaphysical or spiritual perspective, out of body and near-death experiences, those kinds of things. They see maybe some of their relatives after they've passed, those kinds of things. They're able to hear inside. Maybe it's their intuition. Maybe it's somebody trying to communicate with them from the other side. I take the agnostic position. I will never criticize someone who has had those experiences and say, no, because it doesn't say it in the book, whatever the book is for you. If it doesn't say it in there, it could not have happened. I think you're hallucinating. You need to see someone and get some help. No, because those experiences make that person who they are. And by the way, going back to the idea of, you know, all of this being an accident, I am with you. There's something inside of me. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something inside of me that says that my life has meaning. Because if I didn't believe that, if I didn't feel that, then following this interview, or maybe I would just jump out of the chair and say, you know, James, you're on your own. I've got to go. I go out and rape, pillage, and plunder because it doesn't matter, because this is all an accident. But that something inside of me says, no, your life has meaning and you have a purpose here, and you need to be about that purpose. And whether or not there is a hereafter, and I choose to believe that there is, because none of this would make any sense unless there was something else beyond this. Now, on the one hand, if there is nothing else, and when we die, it's just darkness, we're never going to know. Okay. But I'd like to believe, and I'm not saying that there's necessarily a heaven or a hell. There are those who believe that. There are those who believe this is hell, and we'll transition to heaven following this. I have had experiences of hypnosis, taking me to a place where it's called Life Between Lives Therapy, LBL. And it took me to my last lifetime. I was a farmer in the pioneer days and so forth, and so on. And my passing was where I walked out onto the porch of my cabin, sat down in my chair, put my feet up on the railing, tipped my head back, and I just said, you know what? It's been a good life. And I left. And then I went through a cycle of, processes. And again, I wasn't necessarily led to see what I saw. I was asked what I saw, what I was feeling, smelling, hearing, tasting, etc. And it was really very, very interesting. And of course, then I also have another book. I don't know if you've ever heard of The Impersonal Life by James Banner. It goes back to 1933. And it was channeled by him. And it's like God speaking to you through these words. And it's not like, and these are not holy. This isn't holy writ. Don't get me wrong. But it talks about there's a chapter in there about on reincarnation. And it says, you think that you've lived other lives, but I'm here to tell you, you have not lived other lives. But when you go into past life regression, you are tapping into the lives of my other manifestations. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, the lesson is still the same. I'm tapping into these lives, whether I live them or I'm just tapping in because I need to learn something about myself. I need to grow. I need to expand. What about your growth and expansion? Do you struggle with the material world infringing upon your spiritual identity? Because of some of the things we've talked about are very material, the virus and the this and the conspiracies and so forth, which I'm not being critical in any way, shape, or form. I'm just asking, do you find that there are times when it's like, I wish I could stop thinking about this other stuff that really doesn't matter, because from a spiritual perspective, in 10,000 years, none of this is really going to matter on a material level?
Well, I never go there because, in 10,000 years, everything we do matters.
Okay.
But I think that, everybody feels a real anxiety in the force. If you take the, the idea that we're all one and that we all really are clairvoyant to each other's feelings and thoughts, and basically, we're telepathic to each other, but we're not clear enough to really kind of base our lives on that yet. You feel it, that in 2020, astrologers have warned about 2020 for decades, because of the just the planetary alignments that suggest turmoil. Now, I think it's, like I say, a spiritual reset. It's going to change everything. It's ultimately, we're even, our values are changing, and the millennials are really going to take that and run with it. Essentially, we're going to learn that this design and how to step into it, where we have more synchronistic flow. Our projects can go faster, and everything will step up once enough people take this group mind into this belief that, hey, there is a spiritual design to the world that we can understand. We can get up in the morning and expect guiding intuitions and act on those, and puts us in a place in life where these mysterious coincidences happen to give us some part of the preparation for what ultimately will be our dream job or contribution or business or new technology or whatever that contribution might be. Mm-hmm. But it'll be in the service of evolving a true Star Trek reality. It's hard not to believe that that all of that technology is not really out there somewhere that people know about but aren't sharing. So it's going to dramatically change, I think, technologically, but not until we get enlightened about what bad karma it is.
Yeah.
To control other human beings, especially news propaganda. This is really bad karma. And what's happening is that if you look at the people who seemingly control that, you get this sense that they're desperate and at their last kind of stranglehold on the power economically. Yeah. And that sooner or later, we're gonna have this kind of flash that moves us fully mm-hmm. into this spiritual direction where everything's karma. And if we want to be lucky and creative and have our dreams come true faster, mm-hmm. we have to step into this giving aspect, and always are thinking giving energy or ideas or lessons learned to other people to become, so they can have a synchronicity from what we've given intuitively to them in conversations and everything else. Yeah. Once we change the system, so we're trying to outgive each other,
Yeah.
Will we be able to live in the Star Trek reality of all the basic needs are provided, because we're not concentrating on that. We're concentrating on the evolution of consciousness and getting that synchronicity message among other people, and that's the only thing. Stepping into that helping design, it's the only thing that will give us liberty from being insecure inside, because that'll be a spiritual connection that drives that. And every time you get intuitive information, so you're connecting spiritually with a higher part of yourself to help with.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, I just say that out loud because I think that's where we really are. People who doubt all this, I just say, we'll get into a place where you can honestly try to prove it to yourself. And,
there you go.
Become a giver, and you'll have. And we started all this talking about what I want to say is that how do we solve all these problems in the world? If everybody gave 10% of their income to their intuitive sources that are that they discover, that are helping with world poverty, they're helping with food distribution, bad water sources, we could change it all in about 2 years. Feed everybody on the planet through grassroots endeavors. All it would take is 10% of the income of everybody deciding that that's a giving principle in the world.
Yeah.
And, it took me a long time to realize that if you don't give 10%, 10% goes out anyway.
Yeah.
And additional problems, expenses, things that you buy new that don't work. I'm telling you, you prove that to yourself. And this is very metaphysical for a lot of people listening, probably. But look, you got to get into the design if you want to be really successful. And,
absolutely.
I proved it to myself, obviously, because you talk about not being actualized. When I first started writing on the Celestine prophecy, I was not a very actualized person. It happened kind of in the 10 years that I really was working on that book.
Yeah. Well, I will add to this whole synchronicity aspect that I personally do not believe in coincidence, but I do believe in coincidences. Okay. I just repronounce it because there are things that coincide as we move through our lives. And you're absolutely right. It's kind of like sliding tiles of a sort. And we draw to us those people that are that we need and who need us to support. And it actually goes to, and I've used this example over and over and over again, James. And by the way, we're talking with James Redfeild, author of Celestine Prophecy, but also he's written the foreword to the Sacred Stories publishing book, part 2, if you will, or volume 2, called Crappy to Happy. It is the part 2 of part 1, which was Chaos to Clarity, which we're featuring in December 2020, the Crappy to Happy interviews with many of the authors of the contributors, I should say, of that book. But one of the things I was going to say to you about the Celestine Prophecy, and one of the aspects about how you talk about how we have messages for each other, and that when we don't follow that intuitive guide, if you will, we are denying ourselves and the other person the messages that we both need, as I put it, to help sort of build our puzzle of our big picture. We may never really see the big picture, but we're putting those pieces together. And to use the Star Trek analogy, when you put your shields up, there's only basically one thing you can do, and that's fire weapons and be protected from the weapons of others. You can't transport anybody in or out. The shuttles can't get in. You're basically in lockdown. You got to lower your shields. Okay. And you've got to let those messages in, and you take what you need and leave the rest, as the song goes. And we've been promoting that as long as I've been doing this program, if not longer, trying to tell people, look, we place a smorgasbord in front of you. All right. Every guest adds more dishes, if you will, to that table. We're not asking you to consume everything or try everything, because not everything's going to resonate with you. Come back again and again and again, because sort of what you're talking about, James, is as you evolve, as you move forward, as you meet new people, those synchronistic experiences happen, you start to ponder those things. As I said at the beginning of this program, once you've heard this program, you can't unhear it. Now you have to deal with it. Okay. Maybe not today and maybe not tomorrow, but someday it's going to pop back into your consciousness. You know, I heard back then that James said this and Richard said that, and it was on that program, and that was interesting. And I need to find more out about that, you know, and who knows, maybe by that time there's been further research on what they've been contemplating, and off they go in a whole new direction they never even thought of, that is synchronistic for others. And I'm sure you've probably seen some of these television programs, as well as there have been movies where they tell 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 different stories that are totally independent of each other, totally independent. And you sit there wondering, where's this going? I do remember one of these programs. And as the movie or the program continues, the paths start to cross. Now, they may just cross or intersect, and then they continue on their divergent paths, but they connect, and then another one connects, and another, and you start to see how we affect one another on a material level, on a physical level, yes, but even on a mental, emotional, and spiritual level, right?
Absolutely. And you know, it's just orientation, it's attitude. I think the first step in really is to become a giver first. In other words, you can, even if you get into synchronicity, okay, now, yeah, I'm looking for these mysterious coincidences. They're going to make my life go easier. They're going to bring a solution to a problem. They're going to clarify what I'm really supposed to be doing in the world. But if that's all we think about, we're still takers. You know, we don't get the full karmic positivity going until we think first, how can I be a synchronicity for this other person? How can I survey my life experience and intuitively come up with something that seems to us that we can share that would help the other person? We share it. What does the other person say so often? That's what I needed to hear right now in my life. Thank you so much for sharing this. I know it was personal, but I really understand. That's what you hear. Now, the whole world is designed for that kind of giving. That uplifts everybody. Your creativity goes up. The group karma goes up. Once humanity steps into that, because it just builds on itself. It's a hothouse effect, because what happens if you're going, okay, how can I help this person by sharing something I've done or a problem I've solved? We search our intuitive intelligence. Intuitive intelligence is in the spiritual realm. That's the higher self. So we just opened up higher self. So you get this helping intuition, you deliver it, you get that response, where it's the real operating system on the planet.
Yeah.
So because what you give is energy. Once you check in with your intuitive self, that's a higher consciousness, and what happens is it's energetic. So with that helping experience you just shared, you also give this energy that is the opposite of depression. It is inspiration energy, right? And so that person, wow, I've made a breakthrough here this moment. This is a synchronicity. I can go forward with my life at a higher energy. So if we go, instead of taking energy from people, we give it automatically along with helpful information and sharing. It's a hothouse effect. And that's the enlightenment of humanity. That's the mechanism of the enlightenment of humanity, in my view. It's not figuring everything out philosophically. It's at the grassroots level, helping, giving, and it's everybody's drawn into that giving because that gives us the most inspiration and energy ourselves.
Yeah.
Then what happens is that we transform the world, and that's the only way to do it at the grassroots level, and it's rewarding immediately. I mean, I can't tell you how many synchronicities I've had being very dense at the very beginning. You got to write this book, the book's falling off the shelf in front of me. It's a metaphysical world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you live in this materialism that includes power tripping of any kind, what happened and not giving, what happens is that you just miss the most fun about this world and a sense of progress that can take us to this enlightened Star Trek world that we've been talking about here.
Well, when I was working for the Christian radio station and I started down what I called my search back then, I remember someone shared with me, they said, well, and I was sharing with them about my search. That's what I called it. They said, well, but once you find Jesus, your search is over. And I said, no. He says, once I found Jesus, my search has just begun. Yeah. And as I continued to search, what I came in touch with, of course, was the concept of metaphysics. And I looked the word up. And I started telling some of the people that I was working with, the programmers primarily, not all of them, but, a select few that we had a good dialogue. We were good friends and everything. And there was no problem here. I said, you do realize that Christianity is metaphysical? They said, what? I said, yeah, because the definition of metaphysical is beyond the physical. And that's what Jesus was always talking about. Yeah, he talked about a lot of material stuff. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and he who is without sin cast the first stone. But the whole point was in having that union with the Creator. That's metaphysical. And that's beyond the physical. And when people start using science, and I don't care what science it is, to justify or bolster their position that their belief, their philosophy is the right one, it's no longer a belief. You can't use science to support a faith-based or belief system. At least that's my observation, is that, it's like, I don't care if you found Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, or you found a piece of the cross that Jesus was crucified on the ground over here. It doesn't make any difference. You either believe it or, what was it? Jesus also said, blessed are you who believe because you've seen, but blessed are those who believe who have not seen. And there you go. I mean, that's just, once again, I will say it again. Those are my observations. I don't put those on anybody. Well, and I pass no judgment either.
It's an observation that I think rings true. I think that, we all have a conscience. We all know there's something more to life than we can figure out, but we don't know who to trust. And I think it's a time where we're not trusting gurus, religions, any kind of dogma. Mm-hmm. What we're trusting is what we can prove in our own experience, and of course that is there's a larger intelligence that we are part of, and that's about all you can say about it because it's the great unknown, right? Mm-hmm. But what you get is results, and again, figuring out the design of the world, getting into alignment with that is the fastest way to prove spirituality to oneself, because it's ultimately the highest inspiration. You figure out what you want to create in the world to make a contribution, and that's supported by these mysterious coincidences. I mean, this is as rich as it gets, and again, I think we're at a watershed moment in history, and this reset is part of it, in my view, where we're starting to understand because we can prove it to ourselves, the metaphysical design, and get into that. Yeah. And it's not that we don't have setbacks. Mm-hmm. We do. We have setbacks, but part of synchronicity is if you have to look at the deeper meaning in even in a so-called negative. And there's always a positive step in another direction or whatever is, or, do it again until it works. But whatever it is, if we find that silver lining, then we go forward. And I think that if we can think of this lockdown as in this really creation destruction is really what it amounts to.
Yeah.
As a lockdown, as a kind of reset where we start to look within at our greatest intelligence and intuitive guidance and all the things that happen when you're really tuning into spirituality, and many people are for the first time because the material world is not working so well for them.
Yeah.
And that's the reset. And I thank you for, talking about this subject so openly and spreading it all around out there.
Well, I've sort of been accused sometimes of going off on tangents and things, but my mind works the way it works, and I can't help it. It's just, but I thank you for that. I also want to thank you, James Redfeild, for joining us here on the program. Tell me your story with talking not just about the Celestine prophecy, as well as the book Crappy to Happy that's put out by the Sacred Stories Publishing Company. And we're going to have throughout the month of December our special interviews throughout the entire month on all of our programs, all 12 programs that we have in the month of December. We're going to feature 12. Actually, it'll be probably 10 or 11 because you are one of those, because you contributed the forward to that series of stories. And that synchronicity in and of itself has led to this particular moment, which, as I said at the front of that program, I'm excited about. But you're a guy that's just searching just like I am, and you're trying to find answers just like I am. And I think that's one of the things that I've always looked at when I would read books, whether it was by Paramahansa Yogananda, whether it was by Ram Dass, whether it was by Wayne Dyer or Ruth Montgomery, or even the writings of Edgar Cayce, or whatever other works that I have read, Celestine Prophecy, of course, and the 10th Insight, and all of the others that go along with it, that everybody is searching and everybody's trying to find their way through all of this. And I'll tell you what, you talk about this aspect of giving and receiving, and it codifies one of the universal laws that I have discovered. And that is that there is always an exchange. Now, it may not be the way you think it should be or what you think it should be. For example, if I was to give 100, as they say, 110%, which you can't do, by the way, mathematically, but needless to say, if you could, and said, I don't want to receive, I don't want anything in return, sorry, it's not possible. You can't refuse, because that's the way the universe works. That's just, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Einstein, what? I'm going to have to get somebody on here to talk about Einstein now. but that's just one of those universal laws that I have come across. And if I was to do that here at the station, for example, or somewhere else, it doesn't mean it's going to come back in money in my bank account. It could come in conversations such as this. That's one of the things that I found when I was working at the Christian station. I was working a minimum wage in 1980. 15 years later, when I left, I was making $7.95, or double minimum wage. 15 years later, but I was doing these kinds of interviews. I was getting the experience. I was getting the books, the materials. I was getting the contacts. I was honing my craft, if you will. There's so many other things technically that I learned. There's an exchange, period. I was given the opportunity to fill those 30 minutes at 7 o'clock on a weeknight, and I did. And so, we have to be open to receiving whatever the universe sends our way. And it's never going to send you junk. Okay. You're not going to get junk exchange. It's going to be what you need or want. And what we need to do, of course, is wrap this up. And again, I thank you so much. And I'm hoping one day when we get to move around once again, that we might see you here in Santa Barbara, do a face-to-face, maybe. And I've offered this too. Go out to the beach, a couple of chairs, digital recorder, a couple of microphones, and we sit there and we talk about the ebb and flow of life, how appropriate with the ebb and flow of the tide or the surf rolling in and out, and that's life. That's life here on this planet. So I'm hoping one day we can do that. I do have 3 final questions for you, but again, I thank you so much for giving us this wonderful time to share with our listeners about not just the work that you've done in the past 25, 30 years or so, but also recently connecting up with the Sacred Stories Publishing and Crappy to Happy, a sequel to Chaos to Clarity.
I'm sorry.
I'm just thanking you for all of that, and I appreciate it. I do want to let our listeners know that we're here 7 a.m. and p.m. Sundays, 1 a.m. Monday mornings, streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com and on podcasts, SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as on YouTube now. We'll be able to see James and I chatting away here, I think you'll really enjoy it. My final 3 questions for you on this particular program, James. First, I ask this of all my guests. You may have touched upon the answers to these questions during the interview, but I like to ask them pointedly. Number 1, who is James Redfeild?
Well, James Redfeild is an author who's been writing quite a while now and trying to stay inspired, looking for the truth of our existence. You know, that's the way I started as a kid. And, you know, it's all about the creativity. And, you know, I feel like I can tune in and make mostly the right decisions. And it's been a pleasure and an honor for me to live this life. And you broke up a little earlier, but I want to just congratulate you that you do what you do all these years. And you know, people love the kind of conversation that you create because it's a back and forth and honest sharing, and that's rare.
Well, thank you. Second question. What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you're doing now?
Well, you know, obviously it's to make the unclear clearer in terms of spiritual reality on the planet and how we step into that. You know, that's what I came in thinking about. And I'm glad that I was able to do it because I don't know what else I would be doing from that point of view. And but again, it's just the next adventure around the corner is what I try to discover.
And finally, what is your life's purpose? Well,
you know, that's what we just talked about, I guess. But you know, my purpose really is to stay inspired and travel that road and continue to contribute. And you know, it's always something that arrives with me, and I try to make sense out of the next clarity about life. And you know, that's just to make a contribution really in that is my purpose.
Well, I thank you, and we thank you for contributing to this program today here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And we look forward to having you back again as we move forward through the 2020s, the year of perfect vision, if I can say that again, and talk more about the progress that we are making as a civilization, not just of the United States, but civilization in a global context, in moving forward to that new form of human, whatever it may be. And hopefully you and I both get to live in that place where we are part of that new human race, if you will.
Well, listen, I'm all for that. And let's do it again. There's a lot more to talk about, as you know.
Absolutely. And I thank you for listening to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And just a reminder, not only the radio broadcast and the podcast, but the YouTube video cast. I guess their vidcasts is the acronym might be, but we hope that you enjoyed this program, and we hope that you will check out all of our other programs, whether they be of the three natures that I've mentioned. And until our next podcast, broadcast, videocast, love to love.